Humbug. Who are you? What is your business at this hour? Good evening.
Good evening.
Still here, eh? Or are you here? What was that? Did someone say you don't believe in us? I most certainly do not. The mind plays tricks with the senses. An upset stomach makes them cheats. You all could be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of your chef's underdone potato. There is more gravy than of grave about you, whoever or whatever you are. You see this toothpick? Yes, well, I have but to swallow it and be for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of hobgoblins. All of my own creation. Humbug, I say, humbug! Lights, please. That was an exchange between Ebenezer Scrooge and his former living, now deceased these past 7 years, business partner, the ghost of Jacob Marley. Two of the characters in my short story, A Christmas Carol. And might I add that if Ebenezer Scrooge were truly with us this evening, you all would not have gotten off so lightly. We're catching on, catching on. Welcome. How extraordinary that people such as yourselves would come to a place such as this, to listen to a person such as I talk about such and such. The credit, ladies and gentlemen, is all yours, and I thank you. Now, what you're about to see and hear are not the shadows of what may be, nor are they the shadows of what will be. They are neither nightmares, delusions, mirages, or shadows period. That toothpick will do you no good. What you're about to see and hear is what is, the present, now. A fireside chat with me, courtesy of Charles Dickens. course of the evening, I will share with you assorted stories, tales, anecdotes, and a plethora of holiday nuances that I'm sure will lift your spirits and continue through this holiday season. If not, we have hot cider and apple crisp after the show. Thank you. A few bits of business before I continue. If you have any gadgets or doodads in your pockets that beep or chirp or burp, please kindly turn them off now. Also, as an audience, I expect that you conduct yourselves in a courteously quiet fashion. I thank you in advance. Now, cousins, inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Free your mind of all thoughts so that you can concentrate fully on the tale I'm about to tell you. Is everyone ready? We shall continue. Who amongst you is familiar with the name Charles Dickens? Let's see, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 35. Wonderful. For those who have not heard of me, and as a bit of a refresher course for those who have, I'm a British writer, novelist, satirist, and social critic who arguably is considered the greatest novelist of the Victorian era, a moniker I neither created nor wrote, but one I most assuredly will leave others to debate. I was born in Portsmouth, England, the second of 8 children. I spent much of my childhood enjoying the outdoors and reading. My youth was idyllic. Now, after my father was incarcerated in debtor's prison, I left school at the age of 12 to work 10-hour days in a factory. And despite my lack of formal education, I edited a weekly journal for 20 years, wrote 15 novels, 5 novellas, hundreds of short stories and non-fiction articles, lectured and performed extensively across the world, was an avid letter writer, and campaigned for children's rights, education and other social reforms, many of which I write about extensively in my novels. I married Catherine Thompson Hogarth and have 9 children. Their nicknames are Charlie, Mamie, Lucifer Box, Young Skull, Chicken Stalker, the Ocean Spectre, Mr. H, Skittles, and Plorn. That's P-L-O-R-N, Plorn. Moving ahead quite a few years, my first trip to America was in 1842. Now at that time, I'd already published the Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, and the Old Curiosity Shop, making me an international rock star and solidifying my reputation in the States. At last, America, the republic of my imagination. During this first trip, I visited many of your cities, including Lowell, Massachusetts, New York, Philadelphia, just to name a few. Now, an enterprising barber in Boston is said to have sold locks of my hair. Now, I do recall a trip to the salon, and what he did with those hair trimmings, I haven't the slightest. In Cleveland, I could not drink a glass of water without 100 people staring down my throat as I opened my mouth to swallow. In New York City, 3,000 guests, the cream of New York society, turned out to pay their respects to me at a private ball held in my honor at the Park Theatre, where they consumed 50 hams, 50 tongues, 38,000 stewed and pickled oysters, and 4,000 candy kisses. There was much to admire in America and about Americans. My trip to America was not without a few sparse criticisms. For instance, this issue of slavery, the inherent violence amongst its people, the universal distrust, particularly in politics, and finally, the standards of personal cleanliness and public health. This habit of chewing, spitting tobacco, nasty, an exaggeration of nastiness. And Washington, D.C. seems to be the capital of tobacco-tinctured saliva. Now, after the publication of American Notes for General Circulation, a travelogue on my thoughts about your country, I was met with harsh criticism for some of my more candid observations, and the tide of popularity for which I was accustomed seemed turned against me. The New York Courier and Inquirer described me as a low-bred scullion. I cannot get over that. Every time, do I look like a low-bred scullion to you? I didn't think so either. Perplexing. Now, it wasn't until after my second visit in 1867 that all seemed forgiven and forgotten. The Boston Journal wrote, to say that the audience followed him with delight hardly expresses the interest with which they hung upon his every word. The New York Tribune stated, Dickens' second coming was needed to place his name undimmed in the silver sunshine of American admiration. And indeed it was to be so. Now, my notoriety put me in the company of many of my peers in the literary world. The Danish author Hans Christian Andersen. Does anyone recall that author or what he wrote? Anyone? Yes, madam.
The Ugly Duckling?
The Ugly Duckling, yes. The Emperor's New Clothes. Those were two. The Little Mermaid. Now, he developed a fond admiration for me and came to stay with me in London for 5 weeks. Upon his departure, I wrote on the mirror in the guest room, Hans Christian Andersen slept here for 5 weeks, and to my family it seemed like ages. My friendship with Washington Irving, the American short story writer. Anyone would like to give a crack at what he wrote, perchance? Anyone? Bueller? Anyone? Well, I will tell you. Rip Van Winkle, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Ah, now it all began in 1840, my friendship, and continued through 1842, but it was said that Irving referred to me as outrageously vulgar in dress, manners, and mind. I sense he, like others, was perturbed by my portrayal in America, of America in my notes book. I had a pet raven named Grip, who could pop champagne corks and had an immense vocabulary. Now, he was featured in my novel Barnaby Rudge. After making Grip's acquaintance via my novel, Edgar Allan Poe, you've heard of Edgar Allan Poe, I'm sure, whom I had met in Philadelphia and struck up a friendship, wrote his famous poem, The Raven. Now, the similarities between my Grip and his raven was strikingly uncanny. I'm not saying anything, but I am saying or alluding to something. Who knows? Several years later, Edgar stopped gently rapping at my door, and I heard from Mr. Poe nevermore. Incidentally, after my pet Grip's demise, I had him mounted and put in a glass cage hung above my desk to provide me with inspiration. Enough of the biography and background information. I know you're all gathered here for a certain reason, and that is Christmas. Christmas. Here we go. Now trees their leafy hats do bear, to reverence winter's silver hair. A handsome hostess, merry host, a pot of ale now and a toast, tobacco and a good cold fire, are things this season doth require. This appeared in the 1684 edition of Poor Robin's Almanac, of which later editions were printed and published by James Franklin, the elder brother of Benjamin Franklin. And this passage leapt at me for many reasons. It conjured up wonderful Christmas images and contributed to my love for and for writing about the holidays. Now, one biographer noted that Dickens can be said to have almost single-handedly created the modern idea of Christmas. You see, at the time, Great Britain had long hours of unregulated work, and it moved large groups of people from the country to the city. So therefore, the population had neither the energy nor the time to celebrate the holidays as you do today. Through my writings, I was keen on reviving this season for nostalgia's sake and for a sense of social conscience. To add, I was responsible for mastering the imagery associated with a snowy Victorian Christmas. And I see it's still snowing out. Now, keep this in mind, it generally does not snow in Great Britain like it does in the States. However, The first 8 years of my life in London, it snowed every Christmas, go figure. Now, in no uncertain terms, A Christmas Carol is a ghost story. It does not simply concern itself with Christmas feasting and merriment and songs and dance and baubles and whistles and all the intrinsic things associated with the holidays. It is a story of conversion, of release from the imprisoning chains of covetousness for the freedom of compassion and generosity, a release of the chains worn by a man named Ebenezer Scrooge. Now, I've always loved ghost stories, and you will find ghosts aplenty in my stories. Apparitions, spirits, phantoms, ghouls, spectres, including A Christmas Carol, where you have the ghost of Jacob Marley, the ghosts of Christmas past, present and future, and I have found no literary rule stating you cannot scare the Dickens out of someone, even if it is during the most cheerful time of the year. The opening lines from A Christmas Carol. Stave 1. Marley was dead. To begin with, there was no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his name to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge never painted out Marley's name. There it stood years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business would call Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes they would call him Marley. He answered to both names. It wasn't a big deal. Now, Scrooge. The human complexities involved with creating a literary character, such as Ebenezer, are vast, so you can imagine what it was like to create it, how much fun I had. Scrooge, as defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is a miserly person. Think of the words Scrooge spoke to his own nephew Fred. If it were up to me, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. Now, if that isn't an entree to one of the most memorable characters in all of literature, I'll retire to bedlam with pen and paper firmly in my clutches. Now, for those of you who may have seen a stage version of my short story, or perhaps a film, and have not read the book, there's a vast difference. Here's how I describe Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheeks, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his lips thin, blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his gait. A frosty rime was on his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days of summer and didn't thaw at 1 degree at Christmas time. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him the time. No man or woman ever in his whole life asked Scrooge the way to such and such a place. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw Scrooge out walking, would tug their owners far away into doorways and up courts. But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. When asked by 2 solicitors for contributions to the poor, Scrooge asked, "Are there no prisons? Are there no union workhouses? The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigour, then? All very busy, sir." "Oh, I was afraid, from what you had said, that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. What shall we put you down for, sir?" "Nothing. You wish to be anonymous?" "I wish to be left alone." Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry either. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. But many can't go there, sir, and many would rather die. Well, if they'd rather die, then they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Scrooge, quite adept at being a Scrooge, isn't he? Now, Ebenezer is visited by 3 ghosts in an effort at his redemption. "Rise and walk with me," said the first of the ghosts, the ghost of Christmas past, who whisks Scrooge away on the winds of time to his past life and many of his former haunts, including his school, his once betrothed, his fiancée, his sister Nan's death, and his old workplace and former master, Mr. Fezziwig. A jovial fellow, old Fezziwig. He was an entrepreneur and a capitalist to be sure, but Fezziwig bridged the gap between making a profit versus the kindness, generosity and affections he showed his employees. Certainly the perfect counter to Scrooge's miserly and reprehensible ways. "Yo ho, my boys! No more work tonight! Christmas Dick, Christmas Ebenezer!" With a sharp clap of his hands, old Fezziwig cried out, "Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here." In came a fiddler with a music book. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, his daughters, beaming and lovable. In came all the young men and women employed in the business, as well as the housemaid and her cousin, the baker, the cook, the milkman. In they all came, one after another. And old Fezziwig stood there, clapping his hands to stop the music, crying out, "Well done!" There were more dancers, and there were cakes and hot drinks and port, sugar, lemon, spices. There was a great piece of cold roast, and there were mince pies, and there was plenty of beer and drink and food all around. Now, the great effect of the evening came after the roast, when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You could hardly imagine old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig going through all the dance. Advance and retire. Both hands to your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew and thread the needle, and then back again. Fezziwig cut. He cut so deftly that it appeared that he winked with his legs. Now, I confess that I interjected a bit of myself in Fezziwig. One of my sons wrote, "Christmas was a great time, a very jovial time, and my father was always at his best, a splendid host, bright and jolly as a boy, and throwing his heart and soul into everything that was going on." Now, of the 3 ghosts that appear in my short story, my favourite is the ghost of Christmas Present. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called him by his name and bade him to enter. Scrooge's room had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries, leaves of holly, mistletoe and ivy glistened. And such a mighty blaze went up the chimney. Heaped on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, long wreaths of sausages, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy apples and pears and oranges. Ah, yes, our first catch of this run. Thank you, sir. I need that back. Actually, I don't. It's the end of the run, but I don't think you want to eat this orange. In easy state, upon Scrooge's couch, there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, much like a horn of plenty. He held it high, high up to shed his light of Christmas cheer on Scrooge, as Scrooge came peeping through the doorway. Come in, come in, come in and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas Present. Look upon me. The spirit was clothed in one simple green robe, bordered with white fur. This garment hung loosely on his figure, and on his head it wore nothing more than a holly wreath. You've never seen the likes of me before, have you? And Scrooge had not. Mortal, we spirits do not live merely one day of our year. We live the whole 365. So it is true of the child born in Bethlehem. He does not live in men's hearts only one day, but all the days of the year. You have chosen not to seek him in your heart, and therefore you will come with me and seek him out in the hearts of men of good will. Touch my robe. Very good. It's just a tux, but he had a robe that he touched. And he touched the robe, and they went out the window in search of more Christmas cheer. Now, I'm going to stray from the topic of the story for 1 second to talk about a Christmas tree. Now, what is Christmas without a Christmas tree? I'm confident that the Cratchits and Scrooge's nephew Fred had a Christmas tree in their respective homes. Did you know there's not one single mention of a Christmas tree in A Christmas Carol? Notwithstanding, trees, boughs and branches have been an integral part of the holiday for centuries, including Christmas. But the modern Christmas tree that you are all used to first came into use in Germany in the 16th century, and then in England in 1841, when Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert of Germany, had a Christmas tree set up in Windsor Castle. I think back to those days when you were growing up, when you all were just this big. Greenery festooning whatever room the tree occupied, the smell of balsam or fir wafting through the air. And once the decorations, all the lights, tinsel and ornaments were upon the tree, you would lie down underneath and look upwards. And it truly became a magical piece of the holidays. This passage appears in my short story, A Christmas Tree, from 1850. I've been looking on this evening at a merry company of children assembled round that pretty German toy, a Christmas tree. The tree was planted in the middle of a great round table and towered high above their heads. It was brilliantly lit by a multitude of taper candles, and everywhere sparkled and glittered bright objects. There were rosy-cheeked dolls, fiddles, drums, books, apples, pears, walnuts, and every ornament that you could imagine. Now the tree is decorated with bright merriment and song and dance and cheerfulness, and all are welcome neath the branches of the Christmas tree, which casts no gloomy shadow. Now, where was I? Where was I? Ah, Scrooge. Yes. Back to Scrooge, the man of the hour, and everything you've been waiting for, the climax, the denouement, Ebenezer Scrooge's conversion. Running to the window, Scrooge opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold. Cold piping for the blood to dance to. Golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, and the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Clash, clang, hammer, ding dong, dong, ding. Oh, glorious, glorious merry bells. "What's today?" cried Scrooge, down to a young boy dressed for church. "Eh?" returned the boy up to Scrooge. "What's today, my fine fellow?" "Today? Why, it's Christmas Day, sir." "I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everyone and a Happy New Year." Quite the sight, I must say. Ah, yes. This book, the preface. I have endeavoured, in this ghostly little book, to raise the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of humour with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. Their faithful friend and servant, Charles Dickens, December 1843. A Christmas Carol was written in 6 weeks, published by Chapman and Hall in 1843, and illustrated by John Leach. It sold out its initial print run of 6,000 copies by Christmas Eve. That, my friends, is 6,000 copies in just 6 days. The critics heaped praises upon A Christmas Carol. My friend, the great English novelist and writer William Thackeray, said, "A national benefit to every man or woman who reads it." The American literary magazine, The Knickerbocker, called A Christmas Carol the most striking, picturesque, and truthful of all the illuminations who have proceeded from its author's pen. The Illustrated London News referred to the story as impressive, lightness of heart, playful, and sparkling humour. Now, after I had written 3 flops, A Christmas Carol was a success. Vindication, vindication, vindication. But alas, I put so much money of my own into the production of the book, it was not as profitable as I had anticipated. But A Christmas Carol has never been out of print since. And it's one of the most beloved Christmas stories ever written, and that was my intention from the very beginning. Incidentally, writers write because they have an idea in their head they need to get on paper. If it's not on paper, it does nothing. After that, there's notoriety, prestige, money, possibly, it may come, it may not. But if a writer can affect change in people, that's really what it's all about. Listen to this. Mr. Fairbanks in Boston, 1867, attended one of my readings, afterwards closed his factory on Christmas Day and sent every worker home with a turkey. Poultry business, in general, geese, turkeys, quail, partridge, pheasants, all skyrocketed after the book. By the end of 1844, 8 rival theatre companies in London were running a play version of A Christmas Carol. I followed that book up with David Copperfield, Bleak House, Hard Times, A Tale of Two Cities, and Great Expectations, just to name a few. Now I know, I left out all mention of Bob Cratchit and Mrs. Cratchit and all the little Cratchitses, including the lame child Tiny Tim, the Ghost of Christmas Future, among others, but our time, however, is drawing to... yes. That's the way all of you are. Our time is drawing to a close. So I beg of you, when you've got the opportunity, please read A Christmas Carol yourself, as millions have before you. This is what books are for, after all, and you will not be disappointed. Now, I can think of no better way to close out our evening together than by reading you the last paragraph from A Christmas Carol. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, for his own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. And it was always said that Scrooge knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. My friends, it is a season that we celebrate the birth of the Christ child, whose coming was foretold and whose resurrection redeemed all God-fearing persons. But it's also a time when our hearts are the most open to the best ideals which represent the human race, those of hope, humility, charity, fellowship, love, faith, and general goodwill toward our fellow man. Indeed. You know, people ask me, why read Dickens novels today? Well, for one, the themes of society, class, poverty, criminality, and religion are universal, and they are all represented in my novels. But the plain and simple truth is this: my novels tell generations today, in the grandest way possible, why they are what they are. Men's courses determine certain ends, meaning how you live your life will depend on how you live your life in the afterlife. But If those courses be altered, can the ends be altered? Now that, my friends, is a question I will leave for you to ponder. Ghost stories needn't all be frightening. On behalf of the ghosts of Christmas past, present and future, I hope that I have brought illumination and comfort to your own spirit. Thank you. From my family to yours, I hope you have a continued wonderful holidays and a Happy New Year. Thank you.